All right, so quick one today, talking about inner objects. What are they? And how do we basically create them? What do we use them for? Etc. etc. Okay, the first thing we have to realize is inner objects is just a term that was coined by a teacher named Uta Hagen. And it's not something that she created, it's something that she just became aware of. Because inner objects is something that we've been doing since we're born. It's just as actors, you have to have the conscious awareness to actually bring up pertinent inner objects that trigger certain ideas in the play. And those triggers are usually, mental and visual. They pertain to being imaginative, but they have to be very, very personal. Not very personal, but in a sense, they have to make sense to you in order to create the idea of real thinking. Okay? So, being visual, imaginative, mental, we start to utilize it for things like, let's say, an avenue for the character thinking or pertain to a character doing. So I've heard plenty of teachers talk about, you know, acting is about doing and acting is rather, physical. But I agree with that to an extent. Where I tend to kind of disagree, or not disagree, kind of stray off, is to go, yeah, it's psychophysical because one, and I'm sure they outlined this too, but where I'm heading into this is the fact that just because you're doing something physical doesn't mean you are a blank slate. Doesn't mean you're not thinking about anything or you're pretending to think or you're pulling faces or whatever it is. That's where inner objects come in because they create this, as we said, they create this reality that the demands of the play or the film or whatever you're doing demand. How how do we create it and for what reasons? Well, first off, if you've ever recalled an event to your friends, your family, anybody around you, and you've just come out of something that has happened to you during the day, you tend to recall it by the flashes of images or the objects that come through. And by objects, it's not only the inanimate objects, we're talking about the human beings that you come into contact with, and also their action or your visual mental cues on what they're doing, which spurs the monologue or the story that you're trying to tell. That's basically what a monologue is. Um, and you do it in a way where you're not consciously flashing on these images, but they kind of tied into this event in ways where they may flash around, but then once you start to weigh the positives and the negatives of this event that has happened, you start to flash more images based on more objects that allow you to describe this situation. So, by and large, when you do it in real life, it automatically becomes specific and real because it's happened to you, right? But then how do we do that when it comes to the character? Okay, the character in its sense, you have to create those inner objects in a similar way based on the event, whether you improvise the event, whether you create the imaginative life, but it has to be pertinent and strong enough that it feels almost real to you. Now, it's not real, but there's aspects of it where it has reality. Take, for example, if you're recalling a story of a character that's been in a robbery, okay? Now, you can create the whole robbery through an imaginative aspect. You know, whether you are directly involved in the robbery or you've been robbed yourself, you create those moments by making certain inner objects more specific. Okay, so maybe it could be a real place for you, even though it didn't happen there. Maybe that's the basis of where you start. Maybe it's certain other objects that are tied in to that place. Maybe it's a certain person, but that root or that grounded seed that's planted in this story or the inner object is real to you. Okay. Once we start to create that, what it does is it creates an illusion of thinking. Now, the thinking is based on twofold. So, the thinking could be by and large, as we spoke about, and the character delivering a, monologue, you know, or it could be a character doing something, and while they're doing something, they could also have the thoughts that are tied into images or in objects that come into certain categories of, let's say, things that might have happened or have happened, things that are happening now. So if you as the character are putting on a coat and you're getting ready to go out now, maybe there's something in relation to you putting on the coat, and while you're putting on the coat, there's certain ideas of that coat that flash, certain inner objects that are related to that character or the possibility of things that have happened or could happen. And the last part is things that may happen. Okay? That's the last part. Now, may happen is driven on, I guess, a certain idea of will or willpower. So, if I'm putting on the coat and we go to the example of the character going out to the shops to buy some milk, the expectation of things that may happen could be the inner objects. So if I know exactly, based on these two things, once again, it being very specific and real, the street in which I walk to, the shops or wherever I buy my milk, has to be real for me as the character. Whether I'm in Victorian era London in the 1800s, 1900s, or whether I'm in New York in 1940s or 2020s. That reality still has to stand. There has to be some, for me as the character, some relation to what the street is that I'm walking to, the shop that I go to. Is it the same shop that I go to every day? Or is it a new shop that, I'm visiting based on the place that I'm in now? How long does it take me to get to the shop? Do I know the shopkeep? Is it a small shop? Is it a chain? Is it only a shop that sells dairy? Or is it a shop that sells other items? Is there any other places in which I pass that are pertinent to me in terms of those inner objects? And because we do this in real life, unconsciously, as a character, we have to create this consciously, because what it does is it creates actual real thinking. And that actual real thinking is translated to the audience. And if we translate it to the audience, then they believe that this person is a real person. But most importantly, you believe it enough that you aren't very mechanical, or you aren't very, how should I put it, stale or very rigid in a sense. Okay. When we create these inner objects, or unconsciously our mind flashes these mental images based on, as we said, these three things happening. Um, we tend to weigh up these events or these tasks on, whether the image is good or the image is bad, based on our either dealing with that object or dealing with things that surround that object, or our expectation of this could be good or this could be bad. And I'll give you an example. We'll go back to a character putting on their coat and then going out to buy their milk. What could their expectation be if this is a very dangerous neighborhood and it is, let's say, 9 o'clock at night, and this character really needs the milk because the milk isn't for him, it's for his newborn daughter. Okay, so we've just created certain circumstances that has to push the character forward, but at the same time it creates a certain expectation, because if the place or the objects in that place on the way create negative or bad images, then the way the character puts on the coat and the way the character gets ready to go will not be demonstrated, not be acted, but it will just be there, because the contacting of those images will just come naturally rather than forcefully to show that they're scared or they're getting ready to conquer this area of the neighborhood or whatever it is. No, it would just come naturally as it does to you in real life. It's just that you are consciously creating these objects that are pertinent to the life of this character.